So we're going to move on now to the student housing panel. This particular discussion will be a country focus on a few countries with a particular focus on Zambia, Nigeria, and Zimbabwe. I'm going to initially call up the moderator, who I haven't seen. I hope he's here. Kelly Kalumba, if he's around. Yep. Kelly Kalumba is the immediate past president of the Zambia Institute of Architects. So, if you don't mind. I'm also going to call up the additional panelists, Edson Muvingi, if he's here. Yep, if you don't mind, please. Edson Muvingi is the managing director of Zimri Properties in Zambia. And then finally, I'm going to call up Abiyomi Asanja, is it? Who is the founder / CEO of Student Accommodation Nigeria. So thank you very much.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much. And welcome, gents. I'm told we have to squeeze in as much as we can within a very little time. I think just to set the tone, I'll just talk about universities and student accommodation from the Zambian perspective. Zambia became independent in 1964, and a few years later we saw the setting up of universities. There was the University of Zambia, and then subsequently the Copperbelt University came up. With those universities having set up, basically they provided accommodation, and for the students that were enrolled in those universities, it was basically one having to pass the grade 12 exam, and the bursary was automatic from the government. So you applied to that university, you found yourself space. The bursary included accommodation. Now, over the years, the numbers of enrollments started growing, and the student accommodation was stagnant. This saw the students actually having to share a room that is meant for 2 people. You'd have 3, 4, 5, up to even 7. And that trend seems to have carried on, and hence the requirement for the student accommodation. And I think when it came to that point, there was the private sector that came in terms of private universities. I think with that bit, I'll just perhaps ask the panelists, welcome, and maybe, yeah, if you can go.
Okay, good afternoon. Happy that you're all still here. We picked the worst time of the day to be on a panel. My name is Abayomi Onosanye. I'm the founder and CEO of Student Accommodate. We're currently positioned as the leading platform for purpose-built student accommodation in the West African region. So we develop, we own, and we operate purpose-built student accommodation.
Edson?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. We are a listed property company, basically in all sectors of the real estate. We are now the pioneers in terms of provision of purpose-made student accommodation in Zimbabwe. I think the opportunity is in the numbers, in that you find that we have projections for this coming year. You have over 100,000 students in terms of enrollment, but you have less than 10% of on-campus provision in terms of student accommodation. That is the great opportunity that we are seeing. As a private corporate investor, we have gone into custom-made student accommodation facilities, whereas it's individual households, individuals who have good houses, we have converted those to student accommodation. You can see the level of rip-off that students are getting, and that the facilities are not meant for a conducive environment for studying.
Thanks for that. And perhaps just to build on that, in terms of the emergence of the private universities, I think based on what I alluded to earlier on, we saw the emergence of these private universities because there was a lack of accommodation. So the wealthy parents opted to send their children to these newly established private universities. But however, the students would have been day scholars. But those universities as well would not provide accommodation because they were startups. And over the years, there's been a demand for student accommodation as well from those private universities. And perhaps at this point, I'm going to just pose a question to the two of you to say, where have you seen the gap in terms of providing that student accommodation on the private university side as well as on the government side?
Okay, just to give you a brief overview about the Nigerian market, we currently enroll somewhere in the region of 500,000 students every year. The vast majority of that is in the public sector, so state and federal universities, and a small amount in the private universities. So historically, there's been underinvestment in the public university space, and then the private universities that have come on have, as they've built their faculties out, they've also built student accommodation. So we see that the public universities is where the biggest challenge is. In Nigeria, for example, less than 15% of students actually have access to purpose-built student accommodation. So we think that there's a very big gap in the market. We think that we did a study, and it shows that there's a region of about 1.8 million beds gap. So from what is required today, and you'll agree with me that that's quite a significant gap.
Thanks, Gary. I think the student accommodation problem has no face. It doesn't have a public or private face. It's a real problem that is affecting both the private institutions and the public institutions alike. Like I said, you have a less than 10% provision on campus, and then you find students staying anywhere and everywhere where they do not have facilities that are conducive for their study. I'm happy one of the guys who has been pioneering the research in terms of bed numbers that are required for the institutions, and also the costs that are associated with these developments is also here. For me, we're talking about universities. That is a serious understatement, because we have a huge number of polytechnical colleges in almost every city. Then you have teacher training colleges, exactly the same problem that we are facing. So the opportunity is huge, the problem is significant. I think it's the mechanisms for the provision of student accommodation that is lacking. So it has no public or private face, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, thanks for that. Now that we've identified that there's a real need for this student accommodation, what is the way forward? I think each country has got different scenarios, but land, I think, is of essence. If we're not going to accommodate the students on the university campus, if they don't have space, then it has to be elsewhere. I mean, what is the scenario from the Nigerian perspective and perhaps the Zimbabwean perspective? Is land easily available or on those university sites, preventing students from having to travel distances in between school, university, and home?
Okay, so on the Nigerian university campus, there's a lot of land available. You typically would get some sort of a concession agreement for you to build universities out. One of the biggest challenges that we face, and I'm sure it's the same in Zimbabwe, is cost of funds. Affordability is a big problem for students all over Africa. Cost of construction is high, so there's only so much cost savings you can do when you value engineer a building. You still need to pay for the development. So it's a balancing act between building at X price and charging Y price, because you still have the cost of funds for either debt or for your equity. But one of the other problems that we've encountered is actually doing transactions with these institutions. They're your typical public sector, slow moving, and don't anticipate the big challenges involved. Corruption, unfortunately, is still part of it. So there's a lot of you've got to take care of us before we consider you. So we face a lot of challenges in acquiring land. So part of our strategy is that we have some developments off campus and we have some on campus, and that's how we're growing our business.
Thanks, Kelly. It is not about the land issue in terms of availability. On public institutions, huge tracts of land. But I think I was reading something, I'm going to read it to you. I picked it up yesterday, and this was Winston Churchill in 1949, the 3rd of February. And it says, if you destroy a free market, you create a black market. If you make 10,000 regulations, you destroy all respect for the law. It's more of intervention that doesn't create a business confidence. And for me to go and build on state-owned land on campus, the regulations change so fast, so quick, you don't know when to lose money. I think this is one of the major problems we're having with public institutions, in that there's no certainty in terms of protection of your investment. Laws can be changed anytime. You also realize that some of the transactions we've done, not with the universities, is that you have got a 10-year period within which to recover your money. The economic volatility that takes place, they don't care. At the point where 20 years is out, they take the building, whether you have recovered your money or not. So it's really the volatility that is inherent in the economies, the level of regulation that is uncertain, that prevents people from building on publicly available space on campus. And you find that private institutions are concentrating on off-campus, private investments, debt and equity arrangements.
All right, thanks for that. I think, like I said, each country has got its own different challenges. Perhaps on the Zambian side, what I could add on is that with the universities that are there, there is land on the campus premises for development, for student residence development. But however, I think it also has to do with the cost of construction. Sometimes the client will think X amount which is spent on a room in South Africa applies to the Zambian scenario, but forgetting that in another country, perhaps the university through the government has decided they were going to take care of all the bulk infrastructure. They'll do the road networks, the water reticulation, and the sewer and everything else. So that leaves a bit of leverage for the developer to actually come in and develop a room for the student that actually makes sense, and you make a return out of that. Is that something perhaps that you would be looking at, Abayomi?
Yes, so after all the doom and gloom, there is good news. So we're all doing student accommodation. We've completed developments. There are times when you need to put in the infrastructure yourself, and as long as that's priced in. But the good news is that the yields are strong. Demands are very strong. Across all of our sites, we typically will see 99.9% occupancy. And this is typically even before the development starts, the start of the academic year. So the demand is there. I think the real answer is finding a model that works, a model that your cost is relatively stable and you've got a decent revenue profile. I think that once that's done, then it's a long-term business. It's one that has lots of opportunities beyond the student beds themselves. Our business, for instance, has a whole range of value-added services. So we operate cafeterias, mini-marts, copy and print centers. So there's opportunities even beyond the actual beds themselves.
Edson?
Thanks, Kelly. Actually, I don't believe that is the question of infrastructure cost that's preventing people from getting to student accommodation. For me, it's the level of volatility in terms of currency. Also, the level of diversification in terms of the student offering. What we have done as Zimri is that on the facilities that we have developed, we've included retail facilities, medical facilities, so that we can leverage, you can diversify our risk. That has worked very well. But you find that when we started the last project, when we led to students, it was about $150 US. But that's about May. And now the same $150 was converted to Zim dollars on a one-to-one. When you increase your bed rate, you cannot equate it to the level of devaluation of the currency. So effectively, you are running from $150. You're probably hovering around $40, and you still need to review your bed rate in an environment where demand is going down. The disposable income is also going down. So for me, it's much more than the physical side. It's the level of volatility, the currency issues, and also the regulation that has become a big enemy for me. The currency has messed us up. Regulation has also messed us up. The other things are, for me, they're just noise, but they can be managed.
Okay, well, you still have the microphone, Edson. Are you able to just share with us in terms of the positives, in terms of your developments, your student residences or accommodation, the ones that you've been dealing with?
Sure, I can share very nice things that we have done. And just as of yesterday, the new project we put on the market was 95% occupied. So that's a big development for me. The bed rate is good. The return, we're working with about 11%, which is quite significant. We've put in Wi-Fi, we've put in lifts, all the utilities that we want for a student. It's unlimited Wi-Fi for students. It's big business. Accessibility to other utilities, libraries, and all for their studies. It's good. Water. One of the experiences which we have gone through is that students want to cook, and it has been something else. The facilities that we have brought forward does not have cooking facilities, and we're surprised by the number of cooking facilities or utensils that we discover within rooms. So what we have done now is probably to remodel some of the rooms to accommodate fewer kitchens for the first part. We're doing a much bigger project. That was a 200-bed facility. We're working on a 1,200-bed facility, where we have simply said, let's make them more homely, make them more places than just accommodation, and provide cooking facilities for each. It's sectionalizable units. We've tried to diversify again by providing sectionalizable units. In the event of student accommodation becoming a problem, we can actually dispose to individual persons, occupiers, who can decide what they want to do with those specific facilities.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think
it's worked well.
Yeah, thanks, Edson. I think in a traditional setup in a university, the trend has been that a room is provided and the student is expected to actually feed from the cafeteria or the canteen or something to that effect. But however, the reality on the ground in most African countries is that the students will try and save a little bit of money. They'll buy their own food and they'll make a plan in terms of some cooking arrangement within the room. So one solution that I've seen is that you get maybe every 20 rooms, you get a common area where they can actually do the cooking. They can have, in this common area, there's also a big screen TV where they can watch Arsenal beat Barcelona in the UEFA Cup final.
Amen.
And you know, those are good facilities that we need in these new student residences. I don't know, Bayomi, from your side, in terms of you know, what the trends are. Are they cooking in the rooms? And then also, maybe to the two of you, what I wanted to find out, in terms of the percentages, in terms of occupancy that you've mentioned, are there any off-take agreements with the universities? Because, you know, after a year or two, maybe somebody across the street from the university is going to put up other hostels and just start sharing the spoils.
Okay, so for us at Student Accommodate, a big watchword is experience. I'm sure a few other people have mentioned it at different parts of the summit today. But what we try to do is we try to provide the best possible experience, just more than the bed. So we put together a series of programs that benefit and add value to the residents. To talk about sort of agreements with the universities, our personal view is that they're not worth the paper that it's written on. So everything that we do is with a view of ensuring that our residents and our customers come back, and so we try to add as much stickability to our developments as possible. There will always be new buildings come up, there will always be new competition coming up, but I think that if you're able to provide just more than just a physical bed, which is what the students are asking for, they want that experience, then I think that will ensure you some level of occupancy going forward.
All right, thanks a lot. I think we've got about 2 minutes remaining or so. Just to the two of you, maybe in closing, what would you like to see in terms of student accommodation, in terms of probably attracting investment into your country for these developments, and also look at perhaps online learning that has also started becoming big. Just in brief, if you can do that in a minute, and then pass it on to Abayomi.
Thanks, Kelly. Like I said, the numbers in terms of enrollments are going up. The on-campus accommodation has not changed for over years. That's a big opportunity. In terms of agreements with universities, they are not worth it. We will not even pursue them. In terms of cooking facilities, we have provided restaurants on the ground floor, but they don't want to use them, so allow them to cook, provide the same facilities. In terms of investment from various investors, what we have done with the next project is that we have done a commingled. We don't have a REITs law in Zimbabwe. So we have played around with the laws in terms of asset management laws to do a commingled kind of fund that can be then used as a vehicle for investment in terms of student accommodation. We think before the end of the year, we should have a REITs law that should be in place. And we think that's the best vehicle for student accommodation investment in the country.
Abayomi?
Okay, so we think that equity investments for student accommodation should be local. And we think that the debt as well should be local. These assets are localized assets that earn in local currency. So I think that as long as the match is correct and you're not exposing yourself to the FX devaluation, then as a long-term business, we think that's the best.
Thanks a lot, gentlemen, to both of you, Edison and Abayomi. And just perhaps in my last comment is to say for the Zambian situation or scenario, there is definitely opportunities for student residences in the two government universities, and a lot of the private universities that have sprung up, they require a lot of student accommodation. They basically have these admin buildings or buildings that they are using for admin and lecture rooms, but they do not have the accommodation aspect to them. Gentlemen, thank you very much, and thank you very much to everybody that's here this afternoon for this discussion. Thank you.